To today's webinar, Driving Good, Fleet Safety Leadership in the Not-for-Profit Sector. Today's webinar is a collaboration between the NRSUP and AFMA. My name is Jerome Karslake. I'm the Director of the National Road Safety Partnership Program and its many activities. To find out more, please visit the NRSUP website, register for our newsletter, or follow us on social media such as our LinkedIn page. Today's webinar is going to go for around 60 minutes. Our aim is to make it as interactive as possible. There'll be a little small PowerPoint briefly. We're going to be recording this session and it will be shared on the NRSUP website and emailed out to you tomorrow upon completion. So for those of you who haven't used GoToWebinar and you might be accustomed to some of the other platforms, we'll open it up to chat questions, put them in there, and we'll like to draw them as we go through. And if there's things relate, we'll feed them in as discussions, but we'll also be having a question and answer session at the very end. So thank you very much. The chat box is open as well. So over to our three panelists today. Our first one is Helen McMaster of Silverchain. Welcome, Helen.
Hello.
By the way, Helen is dialing in from Thailand, where she's having a great holiday. So her background is very suitable. So Helen is the National Fleet Lead at Silverchain, one of Australia's largest not-for-profit providers of in-home care and community health services. She's responsible for leading fleet strategy, governance, operations across a geographically dispersed, high utilisation fleet that supports frontline care delivery in metropolitan, regional and remote communities. Helen also recently celebrated completion of Swinburne AFMA Diploma Leadership and Management. So huge congrats to you on completing that, Helen.
Thank you very much.
Joining Helen is our second panelist, Lee Sawald. Welcome, Lee.
Hi, Jerome. Hi, everyone.
Lee has quite the fleet journey, and a lot of you probably know of him from his involvement in the Australasian Fleet Management Association. And he's also picked up a number of awards over the years, such as the Fleet Environment Award in 2010. And he joined AFMA's South Australian Committee and soon became its chair. Lee then joined the AFMA board in 2013 and has continued to serve as Vice President or President until 2025. And he recently launched his own consultancy, Fleet Lee. Welcome, Lee. Congratulations on your consultancy.
Thank you.
Our final panelist is Paul Saul. Welcome, Paul.
Everybody. Hi, Jerome.
Paul leads property and procurement at Vasey RSL Care, a not-for-profit dedicated to supporting veterans and their families within Victoria. Based at central office, Paul oversees the organisation's physical assets, supplier relationships and procurement strategy, including vehicle fleet that keeps frontline care community services moving. Paul is another recognised leader in his field. He was named Australasian Fleet Management of the Year in 2020. And also Paul recently had a granddaughter join his family. So congratulations. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
So what we've got today is we've got sort of four themes we're going to be diving into. We hope we'll get through them all. But we do have three experts who will be able to discuss them as interactive as possible as we go through. But I just want the scene set for a moment and just recognise the amazing leadership that takes place within the not-for-profit sector. Now, as organisations, they're rather unique in the fact that they give so much back to the community. They have people that are so altruistic. They're all about servicing and supporting the community and making, I guess, Australia and our people as best as we can. But to do that, they have to keep their workers both safe whilst they're on the road and whilst they're doing their business, and pulling that back a bit as well, making sure they're balancing that they're not getting more for themselves at risk. So they have both a moral and a business imperative, which is quite a thing to sort of balance out. And these three people have been at the front line managing those sort of risks out with the community, ensuring the workers are safe, the community is safe, and they can also have a sustainable business model whilst they're doing it. So huge thanks to the three of you for giving your time up to talk to us and basically to share why I champion, I guess, the amazing role that not-for-profits do within the fleet sector and that a lot of organisations can learn from. So going into our first theme, what does it actually mean to have a genuine safety culture rather than just ticking the box? And Lee, I'd like to throw this one to you to start with.
Thanks, Jerome. Yeah, I mean, it's really important not just to look at safety as a tick and flick exercise. Really important to focus on the culture behind safety. So I've been fortunate enough to work in the sector for over 25 years, and because it is all about people and looking after people and the people that we serve, but also staff. So really important that everyone's safety is front of mind, including right through to the public. So safety culture, getting fleet embedded into that. I think a lot of us have great safety frameworks in organisations, but it's making sure that fleet and drivers' behaviour is all first and foremost embedded into those processes. So you've generally got committees there as well, but there's a whole lot of great tools that need to be used to get people making sure that considering the motor vehicle, whether it's a company or grey fleet, is definitely on people's radar.
So it's certainly not the role of one person by the sounds of things.
Absolutely not, and that's probably a real key point, Jerome. There's a lot of people out there who can feel pretty lonely trying to manage the fleet. It's sometimes a part-time role. It's not all that they're doing, and one of the biggest learnings that I've had and seen, and one of the drivers has really been a focus on grey fleet, because it's difficult for a fleet manager alone just to try and get safety going with grey fleet. So getting people and buy-in across the organisation, and particularly the safety team, is critical.
I saw you nodding your head there, Paul. What's your thoughts? How do you make sure it's not a tick in the flick scenario?
I think it's about sharing the safety culture organisationally, from top down and bottom up. I think it needs to be the whole organisation needs to understand that you're there for safety, and that whilst this is not the core business, the core business is serving whoever you're serving. Because we've got so many volunteers using grey fleet, many of them wouldn't have experienced WHS in its format that it was when they were in the workforce, that we need to ensure that they go home safely. If it's one of your parents that's volunteering for a not-for-profit and they get injured, then you're going to be quite concerned about the fact that they've been there volunteering and they need to, and they've been injured in the workplace. So I think it's about demonstrating that you live and breathe that safety. It's about not letting things go. How do you get someone to do a pre-start checklist when they've been driving for 50 years already, and they don't check the tyres on a regular basis, or it's their partner does that? How many times have we heard, and my partner looks after the car, not me. So why am I going to look after this other one now? So it's about putting systems in place and having conversations with people and demonstrating to them how the safety of the vehicle is so important, and being consistent. One of the policies or procedures I've established in another organisation is managing unsafe driving, and having staff be called by their manager when there is a parking fine, because if it's in a branded vehicle, that impacts the brand. When it's a speeding fine, why you speed? Need you to speed to do your job. So what is it about the job that's making you do that? And having those conversations regularly with people when things occur, and emphasising the safety. We want you to get home in at least as good a condition as when you came to work, if not better. So that's an important aspect, regularly doing those things and talking to people about why we're doing it, and then providing training. So it's about consistency and follow-up.
Yourself, Helen, are there any other tricks of the trade that we sort of draw on? How do you make sure you get the safety culture embedded in your fleet, but also, I guess, meeting the demands of your boards and the powers that be?
It is a tricky balance to manage. And what I find in fleet space, we're actually interacting quite heavily with people in risk areas or in HR, as well as fleet. So what I have found in my experience is drawing on those experts in that specific field and letting them actually do some of the hard lifting for us, as in flicking the ball back to their side of the court, basically. So, for example, with us, for infringements, very similar to what Paul just mentioned. Right now in WA specifically, we've got these really fancy AI cameras, and we are getting so many mobile phone infringements. And it's not just a minor thing. The culture is actually quite blasé about a mobile phone infringement, but at the end of the day, it's also ripping the Band-Aid off and putting it out there that this is not appropriate and acceptable behaviour, having the difficult discussions with the powers that be, and getting their support and backup to, focus on that bad behavior and work on improving that safety record, because often they think, well, they've got a lot of demands on their time. But at the same time, what we have to bear in mind is that they're possibly breaking the law. And also we want everyone to get home safely to their loved ones.
Do you find the attitude towards, I guess, driving and being on the road comparable to, say, other sort of risks that might take place in the workplace? Or is it because it's out of sight, out of mind, a lot of others just don't see it the same as you do?
I think it is an underrated risk, and they think, well, because we provide nice cars to staff, they must be safe in those cars. Well, they need a constant maintenance and monitoring and looking after and awareness, and also telling people, are tire lights on? What should I do? It's that whole safety, putting the focus first, really, that it is a safety feature. But it's there not just for the light to come on. You've actually got to do something about it. And that's the hardest part, is getting everyone to take responsibility for their own safety and for anyone who travels in their vehicle, which is essentially an office on wheels on the road.
I think part of the problem is that people are driving their own cars every day and have been driving for 20, 30, 40 years. When I get an air conditioner craned onto the top of a building, everyone recognises that you've got crane experts and WHS experts that are going to supervise that, but they don't recognise that you might also need something for your vehicles because you do it every day. And so therefore it's what I do and I don't need you telling me what to do kind of attitude, because this is how I drive. And so I think that's one of the greater challenges, that the responsibilities are higher, both morally and corporately, especially the moral one. But people don't necessarily see themselves as taking a risk, and that's what they do.
I love that point.
Yeah.
So how do you shift that conversation? Like, Lee, what are your thoughts? How do you shift them to understand your point of view that it matters?
And I take all those points. People have driven for a long time, and a lot of us do it privately. So everybody thinks, what's the big deal? I drive pretty safe. I'm okay. But you've got to come back to the legislation that we all need to abide by, and particularly employers. And there's a reason the legislation is in place, and it is for people's safety. So employers need to do everything that's reasonably practical to provide a safe workplace. And we know the workplace includes the motor vehicle, and that includes company and grade fleet vehicles. So that's it at its core. So what is reasonably practical? That's the test. And I mean, you don't want to, at worst case, the fatalities, unfortunately, and serious injuries in motor vehicles, they're all moving in the wrong way. They're just increasing across the nation. So it's not getting better. We've got the safest cars we've ever had, and they're getting safer all the time. But the statistics are still moving in the wrong direction. And you don't want to end up in court with the worst case scenario in front of a judge trying to defend yourself to say what is reasonably practical, because that's what it could come down to in the worst case scenario. And everybody wants to avoid that, because we just want everyone to be getting home safe to their loved ones and doing good work in the community. So it is a balance, but that's unfortunately the bluntness of the instrument. But it's then how do you go about doing that? And I think doing it in a very encouraging way, and continual education is the key. And I know we've all been involved in lots of communication, internally, but you need to be on it all the time. It can't just be once a year. We have a highlight on it, and there's a lot of great national campaigns that you can plug into and help promote that awareness as well. So you don't have to build all this yourself. There's lots of great resources, including, of course, with the NRSPP and AFMA, who are both coming together for this webinar today, and others. So, that's the key, continual education.
Hold on, Helen. Something just Lee mentioned then as well, because I guess a large amount of your workforce are volunteers. So you have to walk a fine line, I guess, between how do you keep them buying in and being part of your business and giving that service, to about going, well, this is too hard, I'm walking away. How do you walk that line?
I think one of the things you do is look somebody in the eye and with a degree of earnest that you actually are concerned about their safety, but also the tools easy to use. and making the processes easy to use. So when I was with a different organisation, we had 31 different vehicle types. And is the indicator on the left? Is it on the right? Is it a foot brake pedal? Is it a handbrake? Is it a centre handbrake? All the different variations. And so we standardised. I had an amazing fleet manager, Greg McClure, who turned around and we made from 31 different vehicle types down to 6 that were fit for purpose. And that then made it easier for people to learn how to use the vehicles. But then we spent a whole heap of money on what I called the Paul's unprofessional video series. We took the mobile phone and we just did a video, and we sat in a car and said, this is how you use this bit. This is what's important to know. This is how you change a tyre if your organisation does want people to change a tyre. Or you could go down the path of saying, look, changing tyres on the side of the road's too dangerous. We actually don't want you to do that. You might know how to do that, but do you have the right jack? Is the side of the road too soft if you're doing country driving? If it's on the driver's side, yes, you know how to do it, but do you really want to be changing a tyre when a truck goes past at 110 kilometres an hour, etc.? So therefore, you know what? Here's the RACV number. We just want you to go, call them and they'll change a tyre for you. This is the video of how to use this. So short, sharp things to help people understand what you're trying to do.
I agree with that strategy, Paul, and it does actually work very well with short, sharp pushes of information. So a recent campaign we did was around servicing and maintenance of vehicles. We did a lot of social media and intranet posting, and we used a cartoon of an alien that had broken down. The UFO had landed on Earth, broken down, and was asking for directions to the nearest mechanic. So we accompanied that cartoon, which was out there, on the internet, published by somebody with those skills, again, piggybacking and using somebody else's skills to help your own agenda. And we accompanied it with a step-by-step process. Get into your car, look up at your windscreen, see when was your service, has 12 months passed, or 15,000 kilometers, because all of our cars are standard, just like Paul mentioned in his fleet as well. And then if you're out of date, make a booking, and Silver Chain pays for the services on our own fleet. So it's the easiest thing. So that was very well received posting, in particular, with lots of engagement, because while we want to put out the information, if we just sent out an email that said, hey, so your car's overdue, please go and get it serviced, they probably won't read it and they probably won't action it. It'll probably take 6 more emails and maybe phone calls from their managers to actually get it sorted out. Well, we've gone with the path of least effort, not because we're lazy, but because we are so busy and we've got so much going on all the time. We've got to put something out there that is going to be short, sharp, and give us the most bang for our buck, basically, which in not-for-profit world has to be free or pretty much zero, negative dollars.
What about you? Like, as we sort of moved on to the second theme quite nicely now around the practical risk reduction, what other sort of strategies are there that can reduce fleet risk across your fleets? So I think there's some real great tangible examples that others can sort of draw on. And I think both of you have touched on one key point there, that I guess you've been humble, you've used points of humor and engagement. You're really focusing on how can you, I guess, engage people to buy into what you're trying to get them to do. So Leah, have you got some thoughts that you can sort of draw on from experiences?
Well, I think using some of the stuff that you've already got in your organization could probably help you a lot in that respect. So we already have free stuff because we're in the Microsoft suite. There are, engagement apps and what have you that we can use that can help drive interactions there. Also, I find that not pushing out the whole chapter and verse, the huge long document, doing it in short, sharp, meaningful little snippets is probably the best way. And also I've worked with some teams, I guess, to deliver in-person workshops. So delivering these in-person workshops means I've got one that's tailored for the driver and one that's tailored for the manager. And while they don't have to show up on the day at a specific time, they can have access to the recording. So I can still say with great honesty, hand on my heart, I've done everything I can to push the information out there, and it is a self-serve model. Everyone is an adult in the workplace who've put it out there, and it made it accessible and easy for people to get the information they need.
I love that
It's a
idea.
really good.
Sorry, you go, Lee.
It's a really good example, Helen, because you can have some really great communications and humour and engagement, and you can get your metrics back on how many people are viewing it and so forth. But actually, just getting out there on the ground in front of people, and I know I've been involved with the safety team going out like a safety roadshow and making sure that they're covering off on fleet in there, and just having those conversations one-on-one, face-to-face with people on the ground who are doing the service delivery, so you can get a sense that they aren't reading any of the comms that are sending out, or they are. So that's really important, because you can build it into your safety committee with your audits and making sure that the cars are being inspected, including grey fleet, as part of that, and it's probably more of the tick and flick, but it's really important for that human connection and engagement on the ground.
Also gamify some of the metrics that we need. You're going to hybrid cars, for example. What's your fuel consumption, and publish metrics in a department anonymized version that you can then say, people can see, oh, look at that, their fuel consumption's a lot less, and then people start to self-aware of what's occurring there, or general driver behaviour modules, if you have some training on those and some metrics that you're doing with telematics, for example. The gamification has a very strong pull, and people get it self-competitive.
I like that. I thought a couple of interesting points I'm just drawing out there was the ones breaking down the barriers, the workers, the managers. I guess you guys were working as a bit of a bridge, because how often do you find sometimes there can be a bit of a disconnect between expectations of the managers to those who are out on the road?
A lot of disconnect, I think. We all want to believe that everyone is a model employee or model driver, but the reality is you've got people from lots of different cultures and backgrounds and skills. We want to believe that they all fit into like a cookie cutter model, but the reality is that's not really the case, because while we've prepared everything in place for somebody who is probably in their late 20s to early 40s, you're going to get someone who is fresh out of school or their first job, going on the road. They've got a company car and they're going to go and see this, little old lady deliver services in the home, and they probably won't give us quite the same interpretation of our documents or our information as what that person is who is slightly older, or somebody who is, like Paul has mentioned, with a lot of aged workforce or aged volunteer workforce. Their outlook is completely different. So the sweet spot, I think, is using like a multi-pronged approach. So having something that will appeal to that 20-something generation, then something else that you would do for the kind of middle group of the workforce. And then, you've got to also cater for the technology challenged kind of workforce who probably won't know how to send a photo on their phone, for example.
And it's a really good point, Helen, because we've got really diverse workforces. I know a lot of organisation and employers do, but I think in the not-for-profit space, we've always had very diverse workforces and clients. So we do have to try different things. One, there's not going to be a silver bullet that's going to work for everybody, or even 80% of our workforce. So it's getting that feedback, what does work, trying something, being prepared to fail and see, well, actually that's not working for our workforce, or it's not working for this particular cohort. We need to try something different. So that's that continual improvement, and just seeing what does stick and gets traction, because there's lots of different demographic skills, English as a second language, all those barriers, not just the managers who are the barriers, but all those barriers to deal with as well.
That culture part as well, that must be quite difficult as well. Like some new Australians, the whole experience of getting behind the wheel. I hadn't thought of that. Does it add quite a bit of complexity and a bit of stress to your roles as well?
Well, Helen would see it at the moment where she's on holiday. They're a lot down there, and so many more little cars, and they go beep, and they sort of work their way through. Whereas here, I'm not so sure that we traverse the roadways the same way. I think our horn blasts are a lot longer and a lot more aggressive. So I think the culture and how people use their vehicles is an important consideration, and which then goes to how they load the vehicle up. How many people can you get in a vehicle? Now, it's not a circus event where 17 people pop out of the vehicle, but that does happen in terms of the goods that people carry. Like, you're carrying what? And you can't see out your mirrors, and there's no cargo barrier in your car. And so how do you manage those things, both in terms of the manager expects something to be delivered or picked up or whatever the case may be, but then the staff member has a different cultural perspective as to what they can carry in their car and how they don't carry things in their car. And that goes for cleanliness of car. It goes for frequency of checking the car. It goes for what food smells come out of the car when you go to borrow a car, especially a pool car. And do I need to leave the car a minimum half full of fuel or not? Or have I bothered plugging it in if it's an EV for the next person so it's got charged the next day? All these things about how people interact in society and their different cultures and how they work have a large impact on other people's experiences of using the same vehicle.
And so that's right. And so with the education piece is really key, and you've got your committees and doing audits and so forth. But I think this is where systems become really important, because you can have a really sophisticated way of communicating all of this, but you do need systems in place for the checks and balances to capture where there are gaps, to make sure that things aren't being missed and that you're doing everything to make sure you're keeping people safe.
How hard, like when you're bringing in new systems and some changes, how hard is it to bring in those things into the fleet space to get people to pick them up and adopt them? Does this depend on the type, for example, that you're bringing in, or what can be some of the biggest barriers in overcoming bringing something new in?
Biggest barrier.
Money?
Sorry.
I think that's it. I think all three just went money.
I mean, yeah. You go, Paul.
I think I also find it's about consultation and how you bring those things in and share the information, how you share the training experience, running a pilot first, speaking to people first. I was bringing in some discussion about some telematics and how you use that and where do you put your trigger for when somebody's speeding or not, as an example, and started a conversation and reached out to the room and said, what do you define as speeding? And people sort of ultimately ended up in the position of 5 or 10 Ks over the limit is okay. And then I said, great, no problems, wonderful, thank you. So let me just confirm, it's your kid in a school bus and you're happy for them to be going 10 Ks over the limit. And everyone suddenly went quiet and they said, no, speeding is defined as 1 kilometre over the limit. So it's about consultation and getting people to understand the position, and then how you then use that technology. Why do you want to do a vehicle inspection checklist on your smartphone? The phone's not that. It's about the person being smart enough to use the phone. I know I'm a Luddite, so for me it's about how do I use the tech and doing it in a way that's easy for people to understand.
So that's probably the big barriers. I'll come back to the money in a minute, but the change management piece, once you've decided to do something, and I love Paul's reference of pilots. Pilots are great. You can start a pilot, and if it works, then it just stops becoming a pilot because it becomes how we do things around here. And you're not having to commit across the whole organisation with a pilot. You get to prove it and test it and make mistakes and fail before you roll it out further. And on the investment, that's then coming back to your business case. So usually any change does require time, effort, resources and money, but it's then having the business case to go, okay, well, if we're going to put in telematics or we're going to put in a new fleet management system because we just want to finally get off of our spreadsheets or whatever the investment might be, It's then looking at that business case and going, well, what are we expecting to get from this investment up front? Is it predominantly around increasing safety because we're carrying risk that we shouldn't be, or we don't have visibility on what we need or should have as well? Or are we going to be getting better route planning with our telematics and save some money and use less fuel and energy to get around and, reduce our emissions at the same time? So it's just trying to build those business cases for the executive and the board, because sometimes these are reasonable spends if you want to do something significant, and it's just stepping back and looking at like any other project in the organisation and saying why it's important.
It's also important to add in the soft costs there that people find hard to quantify. So Lee's mentioned, are you going to save money on fuel? Are you going to save money on emissions and etc.? But I asked, and I'll put into the business cases that I do, value for soft costs. Now, you can always argue those dollar values, but they're included. So I asked the question, if we have one accident in a branded vehicle, will that impact on our ability to raise donations? Yes or no? By the time you get 3 accidents and it's hit the press a couple of times, then that will have an impact on your ability to raise donations. It'll have an impact on your premiums, have an impact on staff's mental health. What does it cost you if your staff are upset because people are injured? What does it cost you in terms of overwork of existing staff to pick up the tasks of those that are injured whilst they recover? Put a cost to those things, and then you'll see that your business case can stack up a lot easier. Someone can argue that you've overcosted something. That's fine. You'll reduce the cost, but at least you've got a soft cost in there that shows the true cost of doing something, and people have thought about it. And I find that once you add those softer costs in, it's a lot easier to get a business case across the line, even when people argue with us, because they've actually realised there's other risks and other benefits that go beyond just the pure, I've saved 15% on my fuel cost, for example.
I think it is good to take into account those soft costs. But one of the other things also to remember and to give yourself encouragement, I guess, in the fleet space is that in not-for-profit world, it all takes time, and give yourself that corporate time frame of getting something out there done and dusted in 12 months, because you'll be setting yourself up for failure potentially. And it's basically like pushing mud uphill. So I think be prepared to put in the longer term time commitment, because slowly is kind of how it goes in not-for-profit world, and you will eventually get there. I also agree with what Lee and Paul have said around a pilot. It's often a lot easier to get funding for a pilot that is going to cost, say, $10,000, but is going to potentially mean we can reduce our fleet by 2 cars, which would pay for itself in effect, and also might give you other efficiencies because you've got 2 less cars to look after and maintain and insure and all of that kind of thing. So there are the additional intangible benefits that people that probably don't have a lot of contact within the fleet space might not be thinking of. So as an expert in that field, if you're highlighting that is definitely going to help your case get it across the line.
That's fantastic. That's what you're showing. And just the audience as well, for listening, please shoot your questions in. We'd like to make your interactive and drawing in as we sort of halfway going through. And just moving to the next sort of theme as well is, I think those trials, what we've been hearing about risk reductions, and just throwing over to you, Lee. How do you think not-for-profits going around sort of engaging with electrification, emissions reductions, unlimited budgets as well? Like EVs cost money, but how are you making the case? Does it sort of work out that it saves money for the business, or what are the avenues you go about that you went about it?
So my experience has been, and I suppose I come back to even just the term sustainability. A lot of people hear that just means environmental sustainability. At its core, it's actually got 3 elements, and it's environmental is one, social sustainability is the other, and financial or economic is the third. And when looking at those three dimensions, I find that they're not mutually exclusive. They can actually and quite often are mutually beneficial. So while you're focusing on one of them, it can actually benefit the others. So we've mentioned a bit about, well, Paul mentioned the gamifying and, getting the lowest score in the electric vehicles or the hybrids. People are using less fuel, so you're saving money. There's less emissions, so that's ticking the environmental box. But also socially, there's the safety component. That's the social bit there in this as well. People are driving safer by that gamifying, by going, well, actually, I'm coming in and I'm using less fuel than Paul on a monthly basis because, I'm driving more conservatively and smoother. So that's just one of many examples. I think when you're looking at procurement, and I know with hybrid, I've run petrol electric hybrid for well over a decade, even before some of the taxi industries and state governments had really got on board. But we'd done our numbers like any good business, but particularly a not-for-profit. We needed to make sure that the whole life costs stacked up. So while the hybrids initially do still cost a little bit more, they are cheaper to run and their resale is more. So you can make decisions around, well, we're prepared to purchase that product and not lease it. We'll carry the residual risk, and we end up doing quite well out of that business decision. And that was, well over 10 years ago. The early hybrids, you paid a premium until the residuals sort of got there and firmed up. And we're seeing that now with full EVs. But it's changing and very quickly. I think I just read that all new car sales in Canberra, 37% of all new car sales are full EVs now. So it's ramping up very quickly, and there's already a resale and residual market building with the EVs, and we're seeing some great work done on battery health testing as well to help people's perceptions around EVs. It'll still take some time, but it's getting there. And if you follow the whole life costing, there'll be a point where it'll tip over like it did with the hybrids over 10 years ago. Financially, whole life costs, it now makes just even business sense to be purchasing a full EV product. So you just need to keep an eye on that because it changes quickly.
Helen, Paul, are you two want to add to these comments at all?
I'd say I'm only speaking for my organisation, is we're behind in our EV strategy, I would think. We have focused, I guess, on hybrids instead as a compromise because our workforce and our properties are not quite ready. We don't have the infrastructure in place yet to go with full EVs as such. So it's still a work in progress. But by compromising and by going the hybrid route, we're still increasing our sustainability in terms of the environment and also our financial sustainability, taking into account the crazy fuel costs that we're seeing at the moment. So also with the additional impact with financial sustainability is we have to schedule less time in someone's calendar or in their roster to actually go and fill up with fuel and sit on a forecourt potentially. They fill up half as many times as they would in a traditional petrol vehicle. So there are already wins out there. You just have to kind of sit back and think a bit of the other wins apart from just what kind of car is it. There's more to it than just what kind of car we've got.
There's also a place for the suppliers, the products, how they dispose of the elements. When you take your car in to get its tyres replaced, what do they do with their tyres? Is that a certified supplier telling you they're disposing of it the right way? What tyres do you put back on the car? I made a call to put low resistance rolling tyres on the car that would save 10 to 15% of fuel costs. Need to make sure those lower rolling resistance tyres didn't mean that you skidded a lot longer if you applied the brakes. So you've got to make sure that you've got the right safety within that mechanism. But choosing what products you put in, how they're disposed of, what ones you're buying, are you checking how the suppliers work? And whilst I'm talking about suppliers, I used to seek support and still do seek support from suppliers to use their CSR budget. So discussing with them how they support community and can we tap into their community social responsibility budget or tap into their network. A supplier can only go so far in price. but they also have a network of others that can also support you. So I try and leverage that wider market. Ultimately, what we do at not-for-profits is to help somebody else. And if we can utilize other partners to help us achieve those goals, it makes them achieve their needs to being a good corporate citizen as well as their business goals. So bringing that all together in a partnership, sharing the story, being open about what we do, how we're going to use their product, and how we're going to use the benefits that come from their product and network.
I like that. It's a nice step to the next sort of theme. And our final theme was around the challenges unique to not-for-profits. So I thought it's also worth, let's make it a positive of the challenges and opportunities, because I hadn't realized, like we talk about the CSRing, all those things, how can you sort of work with your suppliers to help you out and to help you make an impact and to the community. So Helen, do you want to kick off talking to that point?
Well, I think for a lot of us, we've already touched on that. We're here to help people in need. And with a lot of our supply network, I guess, they're already halfway there to thinking we want to do everything we possibly can to help you as a client, which is not being afraid to actually ask for any extra consideration or to say, you know, can you do something better for us? Or is there another product offering that will kind of meet us halfway potentially that will help with our need and, you know, make it a good business case for a supplier to help us out. So I think one of the biggest challenges really is always going to come down to money. We always want to stretch our funding. We want, you know, $100 of value from every $1 that we spend. So we want to make sure that we're not being wasteful in our practices, and we can demonstrate and say with a good moral outlook as well that we are using our resources sustainably. Because what happens is when we're looking for a donation or support for a particular campaign and people are giving their very much hard-earned money to our organisation to help us deliver care for people in need, that is something that we should always keep in mind at the forefront. That are we doing things responsibly and sustainably, and are we, you know, being held accountable for how we've spent the dollars that we have?
Nice. Well, Paul, any thoughts you want to add?
I'd say one of the challenges that we have specifically as a not-for-profit is we have a lot more stationary objects jumping out into the path of the car than we do in corporate. Not quite sure why that is. I do say that with a bit of a smile, but it is. There's an element of truth there. The biggest problem that we find, other than financing, is really holding volunteers accountable for incidents and taking care of the asset, because we need them to stay, because the volunteer is actually a large part of the workforce. In terms of organisations that I've worked in, organisations where the volunteers is actually 10 times the number of employees. And so therefore, whilst an employee has a PD and they want to do the right thing in terms of their job and KPIs, a volunteer is there really to help. And so they're not as necessarily focused on the KPIs and necessarily receptive to the constructive growth criticisms and comments that one might have, trying to help people grow in their nature. So if it gets too hard for a volunteer, they'll thank you for the time and wander off to another organisation that's easier to work with. So you've got to put things in place in a way that's fun, acceptable, and doesn't ostracise the workforce.
And just picking up on that, I mean, certainly the funding constraints, the diverse workforce, the people who are working with us and the employment types and the volunteers. And we have touched a bit on Grey Fleet as well. I think that is it's not unique to the not-for-profit sector as a challenge, but I think across the board, our sector does tend to have more people using their private vehicles for work purposes than most. And there's lots of reimbursement claims that happen with that. So that is a challenge for the sector, but also look at it as an opportunity. I think while we continue to focus on safety, and I've delivered presentations around specifically just on Grey Fleet, and you've been there, Jerome, where I've asked the question, I say to everyone, how many cars do you have in your fleet? And people give a number, and there's lots of different numbers put forward, and everybody gives their company car number. And then I ask how many cars are in the grey fleet? And then some people might say, what's grey fleet? But those that do know, and so there is still that, I still will get those responses. But then those who do know, the number's a lot more rubbery, but you can find it can be 2 to 3 times more than your company fleet. You just might not know it or have the visibility. So it is a challenge, but I look at it as a real opportunity that if we can really focus on that and get the safety across all of our fleet, company and grey fleet, then I think we could actually end up as a sector leading in this space. And I think the opportunity is there, as Paul touched on, working with our suppliers and the corporate sustainability piece. And I think we're pretty it takes a while. Helen, you're absolutely right to get projects and things put in place. But I think we are always up for a pilot. And so our sector's pretty open to dealing with suppliers and trialling and piloting new things to see what might work. And I think suppliers like to come to our sector to try that before they might roll. It's their pilot as well, before they're looking to roll it out to all of their corporate customers. So plenty of challenges, but plenty of upside to explore.
And I'll agree with you entirely. And Lee, you've been and others been major supporters. We've helped test, trial that, and can then feedback for everyone. And I think this is a great question that sort of builds on this at the moment. It's come in. Is there anything that state governments could do to support uplifting fleet safety in the not-for-profit sector? It's a great question.
I'm sure that there are. And if you just go back to the legislation again about that reasonably practical, and I'm probably more familiar with in Adelaide, South Australia, but it's not dissimilar across the country, making sure that the motor vehicle is a workplace, acknowledging that. So I think it needs to be done nationally and statewide. Any push we can get, like if there's a state government that's pushing harder than others, we'll get on board and try and gamify it and say to the other state governments, because they all, nothing like a bit of healthy competition, to say, well, what are you doing to highlight this? But I think there is real opportunity. Again, I go back to the unfortunate statistics. And the other reality is that if there's a workplace death or a serious injury, most of the time it's going to involve a motor vehicle. So that's another statistic that we just can't escape from. So that is the fact. And I think we just need to continue to promote that to people, to say, look, the road toll's going up. And if there's a death or a serious injury in the workplace, it's usually involving a motor vehicle. So, and why do we accept that? Why is that acceptable? It really shouldn't be. I mean, I know there are car manufacturers that have zero targets, not just for net zero, but for the zero accidents. And that's a great target to have. And that's a long game, and that's going to take a long time to get there, but hopefully not as long as we'd like it to, because every day that we're not there, this is happening, and it impacts way too many people when those things happen. So, and I know there's been some campaigns around making sure that where there are accidents, that's really being reported through to everybody who needs to know, to make the roads safer for people travelling on it. And I just think we need to cut through any politics that might get in the way of that, because people's safety should be foremost.
I've got two suggestions, but these are, I need to preface, these are my thoughts, and they're not the thoughts of AFMA or the organiser of this particular webcast in your organisation. The first is, you get your licence depending on where you come from. My wife got her licence at the age of 15 in the States. So every time we fill out the insurance forms is how long you've been driving, which she has to lie because their systems don't accept their age and how long she's been driving. But she's going to be driving, from the age of 15 to the age of 80 before anyone checks her driving skills. That's a long time. And I think that we really do need to do some revalidation of the road rules, and even potentially a driving test, as we've got some distance between when we first got our licence. The other thing is, I can't believe in our nanny state that we are, of checking everything, that specifically in Victoria and other states have some way towards doing this, about well, Victoria now you've got to get a roadworthy, get your vehicle tested, but we only do it when you sell it. So that 20-year-old bomb that you're driving around hasn't been tested in Victoria for 20 years. You don't have to take it in for a service. There's no obligation to take it in for a service. And so if you want to help not-for-profits get the grey fleet to be safer, then have vehicles checked, make sure that they are roadworthy more frequently. One can have an argument whether you do it every 5 years, every 10 years, or every year. But ultimately, obviously, I don't think we'd settle on every year, but I think most people would probably say it's not an unreasonable cost impost to have a roadworthy done on your car every decade, for example. And you can lower the number from there. So I think those two things, to me, that the state government could do, but those are my personal opinions.
Thanks, Paul.
Helen? That's a great example too, Paul. I might just say, just before we go to Helen, some state government backing would be good. Their best practice is, and I know the practice that I've had is that we did get asked people to get an annual service of their vehicle. The roadworthy piece is harder, but to make sure that there were the basics working, that it would pass a roadworthy test. So I do like the suggestion of the annual check, and we've been doing it voluntarily, but having some more obligation behind that would certainly help.
Yes, I agree. I used to live in the UK, and they have the MOT for cars of a certain age, which is the car goes over the pits at a mechanic's, and they give a report. And if you don't pass your report, then you can't renew your rego. So that's definitely something that I think would be a great plus for us to have here. And the other thing is, like Paul has said as well, is driver education. So some of the pushback I get potentially is we already have people who have passed the driving test. Why are we trying to teach them the road rules again? Well, I say to them, well, I sat my test 25 years ago, and we didn't have pinch point roundabouts, and we didn't have merge lights at the freeways, which we do now. So there's a bit of kind of blaseness around driver education there. We're not teaching them the rules of the road, but we're just focusing on some, small elements that are new to us and are going to be harder for us to grasp as particularly as older drivers. And I'm not being ageist, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Helen. I think one other simple one is if workplace inspectors are going out, one of the corporates made the point, the inspectors will arrive, they'll walk through the car park, past all the vehicles and the grey fleet, and they walk in, they focus on the factory floor, and the company's like, the greatest risk to our business you walk past. We manage that. But they're like, it's one of those things they just never sort of take that time to inspect that. Bald tyres could be a great indicator of what's going on, but damage to the car, are the cars all serviced? Little things like that. Wouldn't take much. Pretty easy to see them as well.
In a previous role that I was in a national role, and one of the first things I would do is go to the car park and walk through and have a look at all the cars, and then reach out to the state director and say, can you please have a look at this car because the tyres are bald, this one's got some damage on it, this one's looking like it's in a sad condition, etc. And it's amazing the amount you just picked up just by walking by and looking.
Question here quickly, and then we'll accept our close up. So some not-for-profits make their staff drive from home to pick up a vehicle and then return it to the office after work. This adds travel time and distance for the staff member. Should they be allowed to keep the work vehicle for the week or just use their own and claim reimbursement? Question for you guys.
It's an FBT question, Jero, because at the moment you take the vehicle home and you park it within, I think it's 3 kilometres of work, you've got an FBT liability. And that's the reason I think a lot of organisations make people come and grab a pool car rather than allocate a car, because if it's not a legitimate tool of trade, you've then suddenly got an incremental cost. But there is a practical element to it as well. I put in place a policy that said if you're driving 10 Ks to work to pick up a car to then drive Ks, which includes 10 Ks past your house or near your house to begin with, that's just not practical. So yes, the organisation will wear the FBT on that and do it in a reasonable fashion.
Common sense, case by case.
There's a bit more to it as well in terms of like scheduling and offering round-the-clock services, utilisation, efficiency. whole ream of other reasons why you can't just have it all set as standard blanket decision.
But certainly worth looking into, because if you can get somebody out of a grey fleet into a company car and they're happy with the FBT, as Paul points out, and you go, well, actually, we can show financially you're in a younger, cleaner, greener car. It's a company car. You've got more visibility on it. There's the FBT calculations. But if you can work through that, certainly worth exploring.
Thank you for those two great questions. And now we've come up to time. So what I close out is I'll just go through each of you and just say, look, can you give us in 30 seconds, what's your take-home message you'd like to leave with everyone with? So Helen, I'll start with you.
Start small, but you have to make a start.
Oh, nice. Lee?
Yeah, you might have stolen my thunder there, Helen, but that's it. Do a pilot. Be prepared to fail. Just try something different. And grey fleet, it's tough, but don't bury your head in the sand. There's people who are all trying to deal with it. So there's lots of great people in the network who are more than happy to help.
Thanks, Lee. And yet to close out, Paul?
Look at it from a human perspective. Approach it in a way with consultation with the people that you need to work with. And also remember that this is serious, and none of us wants to be at the helm when one of our staff or volunteers gets seriously injured. And it's important to keep that in focus, that it's about safety and ensuring that people can get home. Nothing's too hard.
Awesome. Thank you. What a great closeout, guys. And thank you for taking the time to discuss and just share the wisdom and insights as great leaders that you are in your sector, so others can follow and learn them. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to everyone who attended today's session. As mentioned, there will be an email coming out with a link to it, and we look forward to you joining future ones. So have a great day and travel safe. Thank you.